Okay, here's a quick video about tooth surfaces. If you notice, for both my primary and permanent dentition, each tooth in the mouth has 5 sides. These sides are referred to as surfaces, and each surface has a specific name. The surface names may be different depending upon whether a tooth is an anterior or a posterior tooth, and I'll give clarity there. Also, quick note, for my examples, I'm only going to reference the lower arch or the mandibular arch, but the terms do apply for both the upper and the lower arches. Okay. For my anterior tooth surfaces, the first I will touch on is the mesial surface. And fun fact, the mesial actually applies to both the anterior and the posterior teeth. Mesial refers to the surface of the tooth that is closest to the midline. Its also abbreviation is M. So if I reference here from my primary dentition, look at primary, we have my central incisor. If I point right there, that's the mesial of this tooth, and for this tooth, there's the mesial there, so the mesials are touching. For the next one, there's my lateral incisor, so there's the mesial there. From my canine, the mesial sitting here. For that first molar, mesial sitting there. For my second molar, mesial sitting here. For my permanent dentition, same thing, my central incisor. There's the mesial sitting right there. For this central incisor, mesial here. So the mesials are touching. For my lateral incisor, there's the mesial. For my canine, there's the mesial right here. For my first premolar, there's the mesial. For my second premolar, there's the mesial. For my first molar, I'm actually touching the mesial in a sense. For my second molar, there's the mesial. And if I had a third molar, the mesial would be there. Next is distal surface. The distal surface applies to both anterior and posterior teeth as well. It refers to the surface of the tooth that is furthest from the midline. So think mesial, midline, distal, distance, furthest from the midline. The abbreviation is D. So for my primary dentition, for my central incisor, right here is the distal. For the next one is distal sitting here, distal here. For my first molar, distal there if I was able to touch behind the tooth, and distal there. For permanent dentition, distal is sitting for this one right here. If I could get it between those teeth, distal for this lateral incisor, distal sitting there. For my canine, if I could reach behind it, distal's behind there. First premolar, there's the distal. For my second premolar, there's the distal right there. Again, in a sense, touching behind the tooth. For my first molar, if I could touch right in between that space, that would be the distal relative to this tooth. For my second molar, I'm actually touching the distal right here, the distal. And if I had a third molar, again, distal on the back side. And again, applies to both anterior and posterior teeth. Next, the facial surface. The facial surface only applies to anterior teeth. It refers to the surface of the tooth that is towards the lips. It is the surface that can be seen when someone smiles, and the abbreviation is F. For my primary dentition, I'm touching the facial right there. Facial, facial, and facial. You'll learn in a moment, this is not facial here. That's actually buccal when it turns to posterior. For now, we're learning anterior facial surface. For my permanent dentition, facial, facial, facial. Again, once we go to posterior groupings, that'll be buccal. But for now, facial, facial, facial. And the abbreviation is F. Next, for our anterior teeth, we have the incisal surface or incisal edge. This refers to the cutting edge of the tooth. For my primary dentition, it's the edge that sits right here. I'm touching the incisal edge or incisal surface. Here's the incisal edge and the incisal edge, technically a cusp, but incisal edge for my primary dentition. For permanent dentition, anterior teeth, incisal edge or incisal surface, I'm touching it right here, incisal, incisal, incisal. And again, same for these, right? Incisal, incisal, incisal. Next, we have the lingual surface. The lingual surface actually applies to both anterior and posterior teeth. It refers to the surface of the tooth that is towards the tongue. And the abbreviation is L. Think L for lingual. So if you imagine your tongue in the mouth, for my primary dentition, think of it as it's where your tongue can touch. Lingual, 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 lingual. And again, for anterior and posterior teeth. Same for my permanent dentition. Lingual, 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 so on and so forth, okay? All lingual for both anterior and posterior teeth. Now, for the posterior teeth, or the groupings, there are two surfaces that are, in a sense, different than the other ones that I listed prior. Again, mesial, distal, and lingual all share both groupings, anterior and posterior. But the one that is a little bit different is buccal. Remember earlier we had facial, which is what you see towards the face, right? When someone smiles. Well, for posterior teeth, it's buccal. So here's the buccal, so towards the cheek. Buccal is the surface of the tooth towards the cheek, and the abbreviation is B. So buccal, buccal, buccal. If I look at my primary dentition, same thing. I would start at the first molar, buccal and buccal, okay? And the other surface that is specifically for posterior teeth is the occlusal surface. The occlusal surface refers to the chewing or the grinding surface of the tooth, and the abbreviation is O. So for posterior teeth, if I look at my primary dentition, this is the occlusal, this is the occlusal. If I look over here, occlusal, 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 and occlusal. Again, for posterior teeth, occlusal. Okay? So, if you think about it, if you've ever had a filling on a tooth, and you may have heard a dentist say, you need a filling on your first molar on your lower left side. That would be this over here, correct? Assuming you're an adult with permanent dentition. This is your first molar on your lower left side. If it was an MOD filling, it would be a mesial, occlusal, and distal filling. So a 3-surface filling. Thank you so much.